word from our fighters, sir. Their transmission is being deliberately jammed. If we don't launch...
We cannot launch. It's been expressly forbidden.
Welcome back to Retro Wednesday. It's Titanium Hangar. This is Mike. Today I want to talk to you about the 1979 Mattel Battlestar Galactica toy line. They made all these figures and some small vehicles. They should have made larger vehicles, but a lot of people feel like this is a Star Wars ripoff, and we'll talk about this. And I'll go into detail on these figures here, but it's not a huge toy line, so we can get through it pretty quick. And it is a little bit of fun. I didn't realize how large of a fan base there was. There's people making fan-made larger 3D printed versions of these smaller vehicles, so you kind of get what you should have gotten back then. But I'll discuss the pluses and minuses of all this, but we're going to get talking about this in my Retro Wednesday coming up. Alright, so we're going to start out with doing a comparison here of the Starbuck character to G.I. Joe and Star Wars. You can see size comparison. You can kind of see where it goes with the 5 points of articulation versus all of the articulation we got with this. This is where people say they copied Star Wars. I can see that in a way, but also the soft goods that they used and some interesting similarities that they have. But then there's some major differences. Some cases downgrades. It's like this is the Lieutenant Starbuck figure, and he is pretty cool. It's a pretty interesting little figure here. And with that, he has his soft goods cape, which has a little bit of stitching in it and stuff to make it work together. And he is really a plain, boring figure. Without his cape, he is extremely boring. But 5 points of articulation, a little bit of paint apps on his face and his hands. I think this is another one of the toy lines that they had better face paint apps before they actually brought it out. When they did the prototypes, they looked really good. Then they manufactured it and just left off eyes and a lot of the detail with it. But still looks pretty interesting on a shelf. It looks pretty good. But one of the biggest problems with this toy line is this really small gun. Here it is in his hand. I don't even display them with this. If they fall over and this flies across the room, I'll never find it again probably. And the Palace Blaster on Luke is twice the size. I mean, that's how much smaller it is than the Palace Blaster on Luke. Now, the Palace Blaster on Luke is not the biggest gun or the smallest gun. Probably some of the other guns are smaller, but they're more common. See, this is not as common because they didn't sell nearly as many as Kenner did with Star Wars. And with that, having this tiny little gun that gets lost easy, it's hard to find. This introduced me to trying to finish the toy line. I had about half of it, and then I was like, I need this gun. Got outbid every time. Took a while to get one. So I know there's official variations in this toy line, but I see this. I have a few of this figure, and I've got, well, I have 4. And I have 2 with a dark cape and 2 with a light cape. And those also have a darker complexion of the paint, and that carries over to the hands. So I don't know if that's a true, maybe it's a storage factor, or maybe it is a true variation, but I figure I point it out. Next up we have Commander Adama, and I'm going to just show that he comes with the same small gun that Starbuck came with. I don't even display him with him. But he has this interesting little cape he has going on here. I watched an episode right before this, and it is interesting that they tried to make this cape look like his shirt or whatever he's wearing, and it's okay. It's interesting. Now, I do have some paint rub on my hands, and my figure's kind of loose. He's probably not the greatest condition one. This figure's not very expensive, and the Starbuck is pretty common. This guy's pretty common. It's getting the capes in good shape, I guess, is probably the hard part, but I've had these figures for a while, but I never really chased this toy line down back in the day. And if you collect like Star Wars or probably even G.I. Joe or any 3.75 inch, I'm sure some of these figures will be mixed in there. But this is a pretty interesting character. He is featured in the show a lot, but the toy itself, very boring. Dagit. Well, that's really the name, Dagit. This is kind of like a dog, but it's a different breed, space dog. And got some, I guess, metallic stuff going on with it. And this tail's one that likes to break off and likes to be missing on a lot of different copies. So to get one of each of the variations, there's a brown and a tan. And with the tail was not as the easiest thing, but it really wasn't actually that hard. it was an inconvenience for about 3 days. That's pretty much all it was, to find one for about 20 bucks, 20 or 30 bucks with a tail. A lot of people want like 50 or 70 or some crazy nonsense, but there's a lot of this stuff out there. Oddly enough, there's a lot of this particular character and figure out there all over the place. He's kind of cool, kind of interesting. I didn't see it a whole lot in the show, which is surprising that you see this versus some female characters getting made. But anyway, Dagit in the variations. Next up, we have the Imperial Leader, which is probably the cheapest figure in the toy line. Kind of looks a little bit lame, if you ask me, but I think he kind of has a cool looking face, and it's interesting. He does have, listen to the upskirt here, does have 5 points articulation, kind of a pink panther look going on underneath there. But getting his robe is probably the hardest part. And then, oddly enough, I see a lot of them missing this hair. It's really weird hair. But for the main bad guy, I mean, obviously you have to have the main bad guy, and also you have to have the main good guy. Past that, they start getting a little harder to find. He's really easy to find all of the time. And yeah, he wears his dress, but yeah, Imperial Leader, he's kind of mean. Next up, we're going to see the Cyclone Centurions, and this figure's a fail on a lot of levels. Now, it's cool that it's vac metalized. It's cool that it's kind of like a mean looking kind of dude, but he only has arm articulation. So he's only got 2 points of articulation. He's a statue. He's a, staction figure. And with that, there are 3D printed. So I do have this 3.75 upscaled Cyclone Raider, and he has the 3D printed legs on him. So this is going to go in the vehicle. And it's pretty cool that somebody fixed this and made this. This is how the figure should have been all along. It would have been a much better figure instead of this crazy nonsense pose. It's only 4 points of articulation now, but it's better than just 2. And with that, I like the fact that there's improvements to this line, fixing the problems that I guess everybody's been dealing with for decades. So next up, we have the Cyclone Commander, and this is getting into the series 2. Now, I do think that the Cyclone Commander is way easier to find than the next figures we're going to talk about, but it's still a bit of a challenge, and as you can see, mine are in rough shape. We'll have a couple of good ones. This is probably my best one here, and has all the same issues. It is literally the same thing we just saw, except gold instead of silver. And that's, in a way, it's a cop-out, but looking back, I really kind of like it. You really only need one of these guys, and then a whole bunch of those other ones behind it. But as I was collecting this, I picked up a few. Even though they're not in the greatest shape, I wanted to get some decent legs on one so he can stand and look like a good figure and not this crazy weird pose. But anyhow, you do see a lot of this where they have the chipping away at the vac metalized, the gold, and it starts to look kind of shabby. So this is the downside to this figure, but with that, it still looks cool if you get one in good condition, and so that's going to dictate the price. Next, we're getting into Lucifer, and this character, first of all, he doesn't match the on-screen at all. He's supposed to be more of a tan, everything's tan, and the blue, I guess, sort of matches. I don't know. Nothing about him is supposed to be red from what the show shows. Kind of crazy, but he only has these arms that articulate, which are supposed to be, it's kind of like an emperor figure, and then his head turns side to side. But I will admit this, he just looks cool standing on a shelf. As a toy for a kid to play with, I would not have wanted this at all. The only cool thing is the translucent, and I'm not even able to really show it's translucent. It looks like a translucent head, and that does match. That does sort of match the show, but nothing else really matches the show. This figure, you find them between $50 and $100 depending on condition, and it is one of the harder ones to get. But I personally think the next two are a little harder. Next up, we have Bo-Ray, and the thing about this character is that, well, I don't know about the character so much. I think I saw the episode he was in. It doesn't really stick out in my mind very much. But this figure comes with an exclusive club, and I was like, oh, that looks like all the other clubs that were made. No, it's kind of weird because it's kind of flat. So it's not like, I can't sub out any other club to make it look like this. So he is high on the expense list because of this stupid weapon. By himself, you can probably catch him for about $40. with the weapon. I mean, people try to get $100 out of him, probably 80 to 100. Thing is, though, he does have waist articulation, head articulation, so 1, 2, 3, 4 points of articulation, but his knees don't move, and it's just, if with that, there's no adjustment. Either he stands or he doesn't, and I have to use this stand to get him to stand for this video, which I don't like. This is a makeshift stand I actually used for a Silverhawks bird, and I'm gonna need it to hold these figures up. That kind of sucks. Next up we have Baltar, and he's another one that has that gun. I don't have the baggie next to me, but that gun, it's the same gun for all of them, according to all of the things that I have looked up. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's the same exact gun for all of them. So I've got 4, so I have a spare in case I lose one. But the interesting thing is that he looks kind of cool. Like, this dude looks mean. Almost like you could, I don't know, I kind of get the feeling like Khan, but not really Khan from Star Trek. He's got this little white spot right here. And he's got his boots. It's an interesting looking figure, and it's one that I've absolutely never seen in my life until I started collecting this line, and then I realized that, oh my gosh, I gotta go after this guy. He is the hardest one to find in the toy line. Sometimes you can catch him for a good price, sometimes he's just not available at all, so that's the challenge with a second series of a toy line that, should I say it failed? Maybe it failed. Next up we have the second biggest troop builder in the toy line, and it is, I hope I'm saying Ovion. I think I'm saying it right. But this is kind of like an alien race that you see several of them in an episode. So having more than one makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if they did that on purpose to say, hey, maybe you want to buy a bunch of these, because there are so many of these available. Now, it is kind of hard to get this little golden cape. That's kind of strange. So it's hard to get the golden cape. But aside from that, getting the figure without the golden, I don't know, seaweed cape? I don't know what you want to call it. It's kind of a strange kind of ordeal that he's got going on here. I think this one's better, and I don't know if I've got variations or they faded or whatever, but look at the 2 capes I have, look completely different. One looks kind of orangish and one looks yellow, so I tried to source maybe some sort of material to just put on my other ones, and nothing. I found absolutely nothing that worked for him, but he is weird because he's got 4 arms, so like the lack of articulation in all these figures, and although they do kind of move together, they're independently articulated, but 2, 4, 6 points of articulation, the most articulation in any figure in this toy line, and he's one of the more common ones. But now we're going to get into something that really bothers people, and that is the fact that you can't fit this figure in the ships that they sold. And I believe they made it this size and this scale so that they can be cheap. Now I'll show you an example of that later on, but right now we're just going to kind of move this guy out of the way. And we are going to talk about this. So this is the Viper. No, not in G.I. Joe Viper where he's a window wiper. It is the Viper from the show. Now you see a lot of them on the show. It's kind of cool. It's a pretty good looking ship. Here we go with a pilot inside. Now the pilot is really small, and because they made 3 different versions of ships and stuff that get this pilot, then you actually have more of the good guy pilot than the bad guy pilot. There's only one ship with the bad guy pilot, but he has a spot where you can plug stuff in here, and you can pop this off, and you're going to see the interconnectivity here in a bit. So I'm just kind of showing this vehicle. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun, but it should have been made to fit the 3.75 inch figures. And Allah, we have what I think is called the Robert Bergman. I think that's the guy's name that makes this, Robert Bergman model of this. But I understand that there are some 3D files online to just make this upscaled. But this one here is actually different. The wings plug into the side instead of the way they clip into this. And so there are some differences between the two, but it's very, very similar. Really, really close. He also makes a 2-seater of this and some other crazy stuff that's pretty awesome, but I'm not going to get deep enough into this toy line to do that much. But I just love having a 3.75 inch version of this. Kind of like the X-Wing. As you can see, this shoots a missile. Okay, it's supposed to shoot a missile. What's going on? All right, let's try this again. So, grab another one. So one of mine doesn't shoot, but That's what that does. And with this one here, this 3D printed one actually carries over all the function with that. It has the firing mechanism. Really powerful firing mechanism. And that's impressive. So I like that. And also, you can open it up kind of the same way. There's no glass in here. I think someone else makes glass for this and all that kind of stuff. But it's cool to have this and to be able to recapture what you wanted as a kid. But I understand why they went this route. So let's just put it like this. It was cheap to get it a small ship, a small Viper. If you wanted a few of them so you could reenact the scenes, it was much cheaper and easier. This thing over here is more expensive. If you just look at today's kind of secondary market, these are like 30 to 60 depending on condition each. This thing here is like $400. So big difference. You can have all this for less than just one of these Buck Rogers ships. Except we have the Colonial Scarab. This thing is kind of strange. I had no idea what they were doing with it, but it does disconnect, and so you could knock everything over on your shelf, disconnect it, and it's shorter than the Viper. So is the one we're going to see with the Delta Probe 1, but you can plug the Scarab front piece into the Viper one. It all is interconnecting, and you can do that, or you can of course plug it back into here. You have this launching mechanism, so you have this. I like to put the buttons on the bottom, so that's kind of cool. It's interesting. You can do so much with it, and you can interconnect all of this. You can pop this off if you want, and then you can pop this on here if this is a thing you wanted to do. So with this, you could just buy three. There's 3 sets. This is set number 2. We'll get into set number 3 in a minute, but they're all interconnected, and they all have the same canopy, I think. I mean, they all seem to work together. And this one has like opening engine covers. Now, G.I. Joe does this, but this was well before G.I. Joe in the 3.75 inch line, but engine covers opening. Interesting ideas they had for this. And with it, I think this is probably the least desired one back in the day, so it makes it a little bit harder to find it complete today. Okay, this is the Colonial Stellar Probe, not Delta Probe 1. Anyway, I'm sure I'll get a comment down there about that, but the thing about this is that this one here is probably what was left on the store shelves when the Viper sold out. And it may look kind of like a lame version of the Viper, but you could pop this off, pop this on here, and you make something that looks similar to the Viper. Now, it's not as big or long as the Viper, but it would work. I mean, it's something that when these sold out and you got that, it would work. Now, I do have to say that this is probably the least interesting of them, but it does have some cool features. It has this engine back here, and what's different is it comes with 3 missiles. You have a rocket firing here, here, and here. It all fires. And these are all rocket firing. Now, I do want to address that real quick. The difference between the rocket firing versions and the non-rocket firing versions is the way the missile's set up. And I don't think I have any rocket firing, non-firing ones in kind of the good guys. I have one for the Cyclone Raider, so I'll show that when it comes up. But you could open up take it all apart and trim the piece that keeps it from firing, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, we got this satellite thing that comes in, and if you want to, and I'll just bring another one in, you could make a rocket, like a missile launching rocket thing going on here. That works too, and you can do so many configurations if you wanted to, and that's just the way this is set up. You could put the rocket here and then put this on the back, or if you wanted to, you could put this on the back. You can intertwine these. There's so much, and I see why this could be fun for a kid. It's kind of way different than what you'd really expect with just a standard like X-Wing starfighter. So now we're going to take a look at the Cyclone Raider, and this is a pretty cool little ship. It is not very big. I mean, let's put the figure next to it. You can see it's not bigger than the figure, but it has some pretty cool detail to it. It's one of those things that this is kind of like a miniatures version. They're doing this with Star Wars right now at Walmart, and you get them about almost exactly the same exact scale, and it's kind of getting revisited today. Here is the pilot. He does have, I think his arms move, his legs move, but it fits in there. It's real tiny. People want stupid money for this thing, and it's because they only made this figure with this one vehicle, and bad guy stuff sells less well than good guy stuff. So there it is. The wings spread apart. Now on this one, this is my favorite one. So it has the yellow variants. There's also blue variant missiles, and it shoots. So there's that. But you can bring in a few other versions of this, and it took me a second to figure out which one. This one here. This one is the non-rocket firing, and so that kid that got it stuck in his throat or something and died because it went down his windpipe the wrong way. Now you can have it where it just kind of shoots forward a little bit, and you, in your imagination, you pretend it knocks something down. So with that, it's the modified missile that keeps it from shooting out of there, and it's the same way with all these other ones. I think they just manufactured way more missile firing ones than non-missile firing. Maybe it's rarer to find one that doesn't fire the missile. I don't know. I don't really care. I just was collecting it for fun and had a lot of fun with it. And that is just a thing along the way. I don't have the blue missiles, but again, I don't care that much. So here's the Robert Bergman version for size and scale and comparison, all that kind of stuff. This is how it scales and compares. Well, let's open those at the same time. And the thing is about this that the stickers don't like to stick very well. This thing is huge, and I don't think it really needed to be this big. If Mattel made it half the size of this and then just made the cockpit open further back, it would have been perfectly fine as a toy. I don't know why they decided not to make it the whole way, but it's still kind of cool, and it opens up the Bergman one. You get, is it Robert Bergman? You get yellow and red bombs, missiles. Would have been cool to have blue ones too, but very impressive that this is a thing that even exists, that you can put a full-size figure in. Yes, a full-size figure. These things cost about $150 to $200 depending on which model and stuff you get, and it's built very well. They also made like a Land Rover, Land Ram kind of thing, and that looks kind of cool. It's for the miniature scale, and it is really hard to get. People want like $2,000 for that. So there's no chance I'm going to drop $2,000 on something like that. It makes no sense to me to spend that much money. I mean, I could flex to $300 or something, but $2,000, no way. So anyhow, that's a weird kind of thing that's going on with this toy line, and people can keep that for themselves. Also, like a dart thrower for a Viper dart thrower thing. This is the vehicle. I'll try to put a picture up here if I can find one. But that's kind of cool too. And I didn't realize how small that was until I finally got one of these that throws a dart. And this is the dart that gets thrown. It's kind of rubbery and foam. It feels like foam. Yeah, it's foam. But it looks just like a Viper. It looks pretty cool. But it's way smaller than a Viper. So this is my look at the Battlestar Galactica from Mattel in 1979. Do you feel like this was a knockoff of Star Wars? Did you like it better than Star Wars, less than Star Wars? Is this something you actually collect? Do you remember any of this? Did you learn anything here? And with that, do you feel like they made the right choice making these vehicles small? Or should they have gone X-Wing size and done it the full 3.75 inch scale way? Let me know in the comments below, like and subscribe, and Titanium Hanger out.
The final annihilation of the life form known as man. Lucifer,